since I started doing this stuff in 2018, because of you, right? So I think I want everybody, including members of your family, I hope are really clear that like you're responsible for all this, right? I mean that like anything
I met
bad,
you and you're a waitress at a cocktail bar.
Exactly. Anything bad that Ben does is ultimately Doug's fault, right?
I know, that's right. And I feel I'm proud to take on that responsibility, Ben.
But
I have utter confidence in you. We're going to shift over to the Patreon part of our conversation, and maybe we can pick this up and talk about this. And we've been kind of doing this all along, but a little bit more personal or practical, immediate terms, like what are we doing in our own projects that we think might have some might need to change or might need to stay the same, or like how do I evaluate what I've been doing since since I started at 0 books to now, and how do you evaluate what you've been doing? Because again, like I said at the beginning, I do feel as though I'm at a bit of an impasse and maybe need to rethink what I was doing in order to get to the next stage. So like right here, we'll start with the Patreon part of this.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. All right. So Ben Burgis is back on the Diet Soap podcast. Thank you, Ben, for visiting. When I was in New York City, I was informed by many about how successful and important you have become. And so I am always grateful that you're here. And I do want to remind you, I think I say this too often, it's an old joke now, that when I met you, you were a waitress in a cocktail bar. And
that's right.
And now you're a big star.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I had somebody in New York tell me something even weirder. That I was just talking to this random person, and they started telling me how they were a C. Derek Varn super fan. So that's got to be even more disconcerting.
You know what? I'm going to edit that out. I don't want that in. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you today. But just because in a way you're like Tony Randall on Letterman. It's like, oh, I don't have a guest lined up. I'm going to break the glass and bring out the emergency guest. Don't feel offended. That is a compliment because you are so reliable as a guest. But I don't know. I've been feeling a little discouraged lately overall about the left and about my own project. I mean, I don't feel like Sublation is doing badly.
Not at all.
But I do feel as though we're a little more rudderless than I would want. Like when I started podcasting, I kind of knew what I was trying to figure out. And now I don't even know quite what I'm trying to figure out anymore. Like it just seems things are up in the air. The way I put it together in my head was that when Trump was elected, the biggest fear that people had on the left was that there would be some rising right-wing movement that would roll back civil liberties and that would create more inequality in society and undo some of the progress that we'd seen. And now, after Trump is gone, so at least for the moment, and we have a Democratic administration and government, it seems as though the problems we're facing are more existential than that. Even though some of the things that we worried about have happened, like the overturning of Roe versus Wade, for example. It seems as though the way we handled ourselves from, I don't know, 2008 on, or certainly from 2016 on, has created conditions where a great many things seem very precarious, primarily Ukraine. There's been talk of a conflict between the United States and China and the United States and Russia for a long time, certainly since 2014 with Russia, and just as China has become a powerhouse economically, there's been talk about that. But now suddenly, what was sort of like paranoid fears have become practical concerns, and I don't feel quite up to the task of being a socialist during a time when there could be a true possibility of global war. How are you handling it?
Yeah, I try not to think about it. So I guess I'm like, I am definitely worried about the second thing you said, but I'm still pretty worried about the first one, right? So in other words, I do think that the sort of Trumpified Republican Party is very bad news in some ways that overlap with what you were kind of describing when you were talking about fears that people had a while ago. And, because look, I think it's, I wouldn't claim to have a crystal ball. I mean, clearly I would be the first to admit, like, I didn't think Trump was going to win in 2016. Right. Like I've been wrong about tons of shit like that, right? But so I could be wrong about this, which would be nice. I'd like to be, but it feels to me very much like either Trump is coming back in 2024, or it's going to be like some ghoul who's like a competent Trump, like some like Ron DeSantis figure. And maybe that's wrong, right? Maybe it won't happen. Stranger things have happened, but like right now, it seems like Biden has been just unspeakably, miserably like inept, and it's been, I mean, it's really hard to say, like, other than like whether like sort of fear of Trump is going to be enough to sort of get him over the finish line again, right? He barely won in 2020 when it was easier to vote than it has ever been before. Right. And certainly easier to vote than it will be in 2024. And I do think that would be like that Trump part 2 or DeSantis part 1 or whatever. I do think that would be really bad. Right. And I don't think it would necessarily be bad in like some of the most like dramatic ways that people on the left sometimes say. Right. Like, I don't think like, I never thought that like, there was some scenario where like the, I don't know, the January 6th rioters, overthrew bourgeois democracy and we were just going to have a fascist dictatorship or something, right? I was never worried about that, right? But I do think that, some of what you're saying about civil liberties and progress and all of that stuff, like, I don't think it's going to be dramatic, but I do think that there are definitely ways that the United States could become an even less democratic country than it already is, right? I mean, like, if you sort of think about the spectrum of capitalist democracies, right, we're already not starting at a great point of that spectrum, and I think it could get a lot worse, right? I think there are a lot of signs. If you look at what like Republican state legislatures around the country have done, I think there are a lot of signs about how it could get worse. There's that like, what have they been doing with themselves, right? I mean, there have been all sorts of, they're the so-called anti-critical race theory laws. There's what I think is actually accurately referred to as "Don't Say Gay," and in Florida. There are laws that like make it easier to get away with running over a protester with your car, and so I think a lot of that, I got the celebrities front. Like, I think if the next couple of elections go the way that it unfortunately feels like they might, I think things could get way worse. And then in combination with, with just the sort of standard economic cruelty that you'd expect for those people, and like a lot of, and I do think that there's a certain way that the Republican base has gotten energized in a really ugly way in terms of like, trans people and the panic about grooming and all of that stuff, right? So I think all that could be really bad, but World War III would be even worse. That's
well, yeah. But let's unpack some of the things you just said, because I I found myself, well, when it comes to DeSantis, I don't really know, right? I've not been paying close enough attention. But I always have felt that Trump was sui generis. Is that how you say it? Like he was unique, that no other Republican, no matter what policies they took on, could quite be like Trump. Because Trump was he came out of the real estate industry, and also out of the entertainment industry, but also he just seemed to be so clearly narcissistically driven, and in that way more of a it built more of a cult of personality around him than any other Republican I see on the stage being able to do. He was also a weird mix of kind of left and right impulses. People would say that he was like people, like people from the Platypus Affiliated Society would say, well, he was a peace candidate. And in a way he was, because he would say things like that the war in Iraq was a disaster, that he was critical of the Bush administration in a way no other Republican could have been, and not even very many Democrats quite were.
It is worth noting that I mean, I know you said candidate, but like as president, I think by any reasonable standards, right, the Joe Biden has been, I mean, like whatever, where the curve that we have to grade on for U.S. presidents is absolutely insane, right? Because I think Biden has like committed some like real crimes against humanity, actually, but relative, graded on that curve, right? I mean, Biden has actually been way more of a peace guy as president than Trump was. I mean, Biden actually ripped off the Band-Aid in Afghanistan, which shocked me, and stuck to it, even when the press was crucifying for it. I mean, he also froze funds in a way that, again, I really do think is a crime against humanity. But I mean, like, as far as like U.S. military engagement, I mean, ending the forever war in Afghanistan is huge. And if you look at the numbers of airstrikes, like he's actually almost completely ended the drone war. I mean, there's like barely anything going on, compared to what was going on under either Trump or Obama. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, right? But it is, I think, just an interesting thing worth throwing in there, right? Just because I think that, like, a lot of people, I don't think it really fits with any of the usual narratives that anybody has about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to
he didn't do a no-fly zone in Ukraine. I kind of think that.
Oh my God! Well, I mean, yeah,
I kind of think that, like, if like Pete Buttigieg was president, he probably would have done the no-fly zone.
You think? I don't know. I there was no one in the military who was advising that. There was like no. That
I
was,
don't know.
The deep state, and the Defense Department did not want to see that happen.
Okay, well, I hope you're right, but I mean, I just have, but like there was, when there was all this public pressure to do that, right? I mean, like that's, I mean, and this is also, by the way, where the Trump comparison gets really hard, because like I honestly have no fucking idea what Donald Trump would have done if he were president when all of this happened. I think
right. It's impossible to say, right?
I think the range of options go all the way from Trump,
nuke Moscow.
Yeah. It goes from nuke Moscow on one end to like make some sort of deal with Putin and head off the invasion on the other end. And I have absolutely no, I think it's actually in principle unknowable what Trump would have done.
So was it Obama who really saw us through the ending of the occupation of Iraq, or was it Trump? Do you remember? I think it was a slow process, but I remember it being
a slow
Obama.
process. I think that think that technically, well, hold on. I think because it's weird and complicated because like I think there were a bunch of different announcements that it was over, and that oftentimes if you looked at the fine print, it like wasn't
It
quite
wasn't.
over,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
so I'm not.
I think the
And it's
last one
also,
was under Trump, but the first big one was under Obama, right?
yeah, because it was under Obama that like there was an attempt to negotiate keeping some residual troops in Iraq that like fell through, right? And so I think there was at least a minute where like there were probably still like drones and like a few things, but like more or less U.S. military presence in Iraq was gone. But then I think some of it came back a little bit because of the war against ISIS.
Right. But when Obama, what I recall, and
Yeah,
you know what, I will
Yeah.
check into this and maybe
sure.
do a fact check at the beginning of when this is released. But
Yeah,
when Obama started the withdrawal of troops from Iraq, he got a lot of credit for that.
yeah.
But he had done it on the timetable that the Bush administration agreed
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to. And that for all of it, for Iraq and Afghanistan both, the fact that it eventually ended
Mm-hmm.
hardly counts to me as some great victory for any kind of peace movement or a peace candidate or
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, I pretty much agree with you. The one thing I would just say though is that like, I do think in the Afghanistan case specifically, I do think that like even though Trump negotiated the framework, I think it's kind of not a coincidence that the timing was such that it wouldn't actually kick in until later. And I think there's at the very least an open question about whether he would have been able to bring himself to rip off the Band-Aid completely at the end, especially under the circumstances of like, I mean, actually it's kind of half forgotten now, which is good, but like at the time that it was happening, right? I mean, that they like really like, Biden was just being like absolutely murdered in the press, and
I know, no, there was across this political spectrum, people were very critical of Biden and the way in which that was done, and it looked like a defeat for everybody when it happened. I mean, I remember images of Afghan army, people, soldiers. I believe, or police, or some people within the bureaucracy trying to exit with the U.S. forces and like grabbing onto the helicopter and then being dropped, to their death. They're like, that's on film or something like that, because it was just like a disaster,
right?
In the way that they exited.
And I think it probably, my sense, I mean, I know that not everybody believes this. I know there's an argument about the fighting season or whatever. Although honestly, I think there are times in the past the Taliban has been willing to fight outside of that, right? When they needed to. But like, I don't know. I mean, without claiming to have any sort of like granular expertise about military strategy and all that, which by the way, none of the people who are mad at Biden had either. But my sense is that it was always going to end like that, that the only way realistically that it wasn't would be if Biden had done the even more unpopular thing and just basically done a negotiated surrender to the Taliban, so it could get out in an orderly way. Because like otherwise, I mean, the whole thing is that this government we've been propping up, I mean, didn't have enough of a base of support to last like a second, without U.S. troops backing it up. So I mean, it collapsed before we could even get everybody out. Which, I mean, whatever else you want to say about it, I mean, it really does underline how just like tragically, amazingly pointless the previous 20 years were.
Yeah, and so back to Trump as a supposed peace candidate. One of the things that would cut against that for me completely would be one, the extrajudicial assassination of an Iraqi political leader. The way in which he violated all norms, and like that. Also, the arming of Ukraine during that time obviously set up the conflict that we have now. That is happening in Ukraine. I believe that arming Ukraine helped to lead to the eventual invasion.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point that, again, I think it kind of screws with everybody's narratives about this on various sides. That that like during the Obama years, one of the big like Republican talking points about like what a terrible cuck Obama was that he wasn't willing to send heavy weaponry to
Right.
Ukraine, and Trump was.
Right. And I think that's because Trump just was listening to what's sometimes called the blob or the Washington consensus more than Obama did, although Obama did as well, and certainly Biden has. And yeah, it screws with everyone's narrative because it's not very clear. Like I believe that that Hillary Clinton, if she had been elected, would have armed Ukraine as well. I mean, I can't justify that belief with any.
No, but I mean that does seem right? I mean that's like right. I mean again, I mean you're probably right that this is what I said about Buttigieg is wrong for the reason you said, but like I just like all of these sort of like weird lab grown Democrats like Hillary and Buttigieg and all these people. Like I just have this like I just on a sort of dumb intuitive level. There's probably no reason I think this is true, right? Like, but I just feel like, yeah, they would have like gone to the brink and done whatever so that people didn't think they were weak.
Right. Yeah, that might be. There are these kind of, particular kind of contingent factors involved in these decisions, but I think
I think that it's entirely possible that it's entirely possible that neither of us would have ever existed if JFK had been assassinated a few years earlier and like LBJ had been president during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because if you read I'm blanking on the guy's name. I read all three of those books, but the Master of the Senate, that guy, those books about LBJ. Do you read the parts about his reaction to the Cuban Missile Crisis? He like his role in those meetings was be like, no man, we need to show them that we're tough. Like go in and like, we need to like go in and like start shooting at the Russian missile installations in Cuba.
Right.
And so it's like I don't know. I mean, I always think about
also if that one Russian submarine commander had never been born, we would all be gone too, right? There are these moments that are just particular and contingent, but I also feel like if you focus on those, it leads you to kind of political impotence because you don't know. You can't. That's the level you can't do fucking anything, right? I mean, maybe you can if it's a matter of like who's president, but you certainly can't if it's like who's in that Russian submarine, and they seem to be equally important at times, right? So I just maybe this is not justifiable, but I try to think about the overall like trends rather than specific administrations. Like I would not blame the Bush administration for the economic crisis of 2008, despite how much I disliked the Bush administration, right?
No, but probably if Al Gore had, he was elected, but if Al Gore had become president, like nothing would have been different.
Right. I mean, there may have been things that would have been different. Perhaps we would not have gone into. I mean, it could have been.
Oh yeah. To be clear, nothing would have been different about the subprime lending and the housing.
But right. Yeah. But I mean, like it's conceivable that September 11th wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's really hard to know.
Right. Well, there's all these warnings and intelligence briefings and how you react.
No, I remember all of what was the old like Jon Stewart bit on the Daily Show where he was he was going through he started with the real and then went into the parody briefings, as the Bin Laden determined to attack within the United States. No really dumbass Bin Laden determined to attack within the United States. Right? So it's right. Maybe, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I can remember, I can certainly remember that long ago beautiful time when I was in my early 20s and I was convinced that a slightly less incompetent version of the Bush administration would have stopped it. Is that actually true? I have no idea. It might be.
Yeah, but the major thing that I am trying to grapple with right now is given given who I am. This is how I'm thinking, really, because it
Yeah.
has to do with my age
Yeah.
and where I grew up. So like I was born in 1970. I remember the Reagan administration and the warmongering and saber rattling that went on during his administration pretty vividly. I grew up near NORAD, like right under, like in the shadow of NORAD. So the fear of nuclear destruction, nuclear Armageddon, was baked into me pretty early on. Like by the time I was 11, I was
Sure.
anti-nuke all the way, and it dominated my thoughts, nightmares, and all that. And so now I think about the conflict in Ukraine in the context of mutual assured destruction, in the context of remembering the fears that I had back then, and that we all had in the 80s, and certainly earlier in the 60s. I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like to actually live through the Cuban Missile Crisis. And
Right.
But I also feel as though in the 80s and perhaps the 60s, there was a left that really was very concerned about nuclear destruction, nuclear Armageddon, that was trying to organize disarmament and for peace, and now risking global conflict and nuclear war is one of, not the only, left positions that we have on the table. And that is different.
Yeah, for
than
sure.
anything I experienced in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think our friend Jean Bajalan has a good line on some of this stuff, which I don't remember which of us said this, but like I had a good conversation about this, where it's like I think in some ways what you're seeing over Ukraine, and it probably would have happened over other things, but this like a weird dramatic version of it is this split between two very different groups of people who were sort of thrown together in kind of 2015 to 2020, which, like, very roughly the way I like to think about it is like, okay, there's the kind of Bernie voter who reads Jacobin, and then there's like the kind of Bernie voter who's like Bernie 2016 sticker was right next to their Obama 2012 sticker they never bothered to peel off, right? You know, and I think those two groups are probably splitting apart now in the aftermath of the defeats of the last couple of years, and also probably there's been some movement from the first group to the second group, right? You know, that that like some people, as you know, as they kind of realize, you know, like in one way or another, right? I mean, it's almost like I don't know. I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a friend of my parents, you know, a guy I've known forever. And, you know, me and my dad and my brother went over while I was in Michigan and helped to move some furniture. Then we like went upstairs and had a drink, and he was, you know, we're just kind of talking, and he was referring to things that had happened, you know, like back in his like 20s, and the, you know, and he's from Britain, and he was talking about the campaign for nuclear disarmament, actually, you know, I think is the group that he was talking about. I'm not sure, but and he wasn't trying to be dramatic or like goofy about this. It was just like totally in passing without affectation. He said, yeah, back when I thought that anything could change, right? You know, and he was describing this experience, right? And I think, you know, I think a lot of people, when they sort of have that feeling that the, you know, whatever, the revolution hasn't happened, right? You know, and that we're just sort of stuck with what we're stuck with, you know, for a while. In one way or another. I mean, obviously the 1970s version was more dramatic because there were, you know, people who had a feeling that there was a, you know, more on the table than just like, you know, let's get some mild social democracy, which was all that we were ever talking about in 2015 to 20, you know, but like we're sort of having a version of it where I think a lot of people are feeling like even that is deferred, you know, for a long time maybe, right? And you know, and I think a lot of people conclude a lot of different things from it, but like certainly some people, when they decide that's not going to happen, right? I mean, they recalibrate their politics, or people who were maybe always basically, you know, Obama sticker next to the Bernie sticker people, like, but who were maybe like conjecturally drifted in a better direction, or like sort of pulled back to where they were, right? And they think, you know, and in some ways, I mean, the analogy I used in the article I wrote for Sublation, you know, was obviously to Christopher Hitchens, you know, but I mean, like, in some ways, I think there is a real analogy there, that they, that people sort of feel that they're, you know, like, well, okay, we're stuck with this, right? We're just going to accept capitalist realism, so let's at least have some kind of liberal democratic version of that, right? You know, instead of like whatever's represented by like Putinism, and that can, I think it's sort of clear how that can lead people in a bad direction on this stuff, you know, that, and I would say that there is a sort of core left that has had a much better position. In other words, like, if you think about like the sort of, you know, I don't know, institutions of like, you know, more moderate than Doug Lain, but, you know, but more, but like, of American sort of socialist expression as that have developed since 2015, right? Like, you know, Jacobin, current affairs, the DSA, even, right? You know,
has current affairs been pretty good on this?
Yeah, current affairs has been very good on this. If you read, like actually, no, I'll send you some links. You should actually be reading this stuff, because actually, especially right when it all started, the Nathan Robinson wrote a bunch of articles with titles like "Can we have an intelligent adult conversation about Russia?" and "Taking World War III seriously."
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, so I think like, yeah, Jacobin and current affairs, I think, have both been good on this. I think DSA basically has, although even there, I think that you probably get some version of this split, because like, it's like DSA as an organization, certainly the International Committee of DSA has been very sort of, you know, like, has been very aggressive in taking a you know, peacenik kind of line about this. Although certainly anybody who's like an elected official who's aligned, you know, who's somewhat aligned with it, has not, right? I mean, like, this is the you know,
well, what was
this
Sanders?
is really where you've got the split.
I know before the invasion, Sanders wanted to. I just kind of Googled this while we were talking, actually, but Sanders wanted to negotiate before the invasion happened, to head off the invasion, and he was much better than Biden on that. But
yeah,
since then,
he's largely fallen into line since the yeah. So I mean, I wrote an article for Jacobin about this called like, I think it was called like, "We Should Have Listened to Bernie Sanders About Ukraine," or something like that, you know, where like I was sort of bringing back up, because like nobody even remembers this anymore. Right?
By the way, Ben, this is something that bugs me now.
Okay.
I try to find out information about things, and I Google things that I'm interested in, and your fucking articles pop up, and I go, oh, okay. Well, Burgis and I know that we're going to mostly agree, and now I want to find, you know, the information. But actually, you're become a pretty good journalist as well as a columnist. So I appreciate what you've been doing.
Thanks for that. But yeah, I do. But yeah, I mean, I think Bernie, like, I think that the, yeah, I think Bernie's op-ed in The Guardian back in February before the invasion, right? I mean, which I mean, actually, yeah, I remember the timing of this in a weird way, right? Because I think it was literally I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine started literally like late the night that I was on Rogan, and like before, I think so. If not, it was like the next day, right? You know, it's like, oh well, that's gonna, for better or for worse, right? You know, that's gonna affect how many people pay attention to that. You know, the sort of petty thing about me personally. But yeah, I think. But before that, like a couple of weeks before, early February, Bernie Sanders wrote an op-ed for The Guardian saying the United States should be involved in peace negotiations over the conflict in Ukraine, and I think that was a pretty good article. I mean, I think you know, I think it was the, you know, I think it was the right line, you know, and and I think that was great. I think he gets a lot of credit for that. What he doesn't get credit for is his positions since it started, which is to say that since it started, he's largely shut up about the whole subject, and he's largely fallen into line as far as voting. I will say I also wrote an article for Current Affairs about this called Congressional Progressives Need to Do Better on Foreign Policy, but that doesn't mean Republicans are doves, where I was sort of trying to simultaneously make the point that Bernie and the squad shouldn't have voted for all this military aid to Ukraine. That at the very least, what I say in the article is they could have, they could have at least said as a precondition, right, for voting for any more, let's at least get Biden to commit to make some effort to pursue peace negotiations. But, obviously they didn't do that. And I think that's a huge, I think that's really bad, right? I don't even want to say it's a mistake, because that makes it sound like it was an accident somehow, right? That this happened. But I mean, I think that was a really unfortunate capitulation, right, to the kind of dominant Democratic Party line on that stuff. I mean, I think now, I mean, the other half the point of that article was basically a subtweet of Glenn Greenwald, who sort of said, "Oh, now the real anti-war voices are these Republicans who voted against the funding," and I think that's still wrong. I think if you, I kind of tried to make the case in the article that if you actually poked into what any of these people think at all, right, about other issues, they're all they're all super terrible, on foreign policy. They're all huge anti-China hawks and all this stuff. But yeah, I mean,
what was the motivation for them to vote against the aid to Ukraine?
Yeah, well, their stated motivation, at least, was that they what they all said was that it was too much money, and they were objected to at a spending level. Now, you could ask, okay, that's never stopped them before, for any kind of military expenditure. So what's going on there, right? I mean, I think that I think it's a little bit hard to say, because I mean, the one who, I mean, it kills me to say this, the one who was actually the only one, I think the only one of the Republicans who actually mentioned negotiations and what she said about it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, who's the craziest, person in there possibly. But so I guess some kind of credit to her there. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I think that there's there is. I mean, I guess it takes us back to the was Trump a peace candidate question, right? Because I do think the thing that is true is that there's at least a strain of rhetoric in that was introduced by Trump that was, it was always complicated, because he was also saying things in 2016 we should bomb the shit out of them and let's torture the families of terrorists and stuff like that. But
right. No, it was a very weird thing. He was a peace candidate who was absolutely bellicose and threatening. He wanted to steal the oil. Why didn't we just steal the oil? But what
yeah, no, exactly. So it's so it was always weird and complicated, but there was an element there, right? I mean, he had he criticized the Iraq War, right, in one of the first debates with Jeb Bush. He and pretended that he was always against it, which he wasn't, but whatever, right? That he at least pretended. There was this kind of strain of America first, at least gesturing at something like right-wing isolation.
Yeah, I mean, it was this sort of isolationist position, which is not necessarily even truly pacifist, right?
Sure.
And it's also not at all the domain of the left exclusively, or even predominantly, the kind of.
But if this is something that's actually going to lead people to oppose wars, that's good,
yeah, right. You work in coalitions, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
But yeah, I think that the rank and file, including some of the media personalities that are kind of sitting on top of the rank and file, might be more prone to be peace or pacifist or part of a peace movement now of some kind, than the rank and file of the Democratic Party and the media personalities that are providing those consumers with news. I think that the rhetoric and the spectacle around the two parties is shifting. But I do believe that once either party gets into power, that for the most part, some version of a neocon is going to be running U.S.
I mean, right. I mean, Trump did hire John Bolton, right? That's
right.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's. I think the first part of what you just said is less clear to me. I mean, that could be true. I think the evidence is a little bit more mixed, right? You know, in terms of like polls and all that. But maybe, yeah. I mean, certainly there is some truth to it because, like, just in terms of like the popular media personalities, right? I mean, if you're like if you're a super fan of Tucker Carlson, you're going to have better foreign policy positions than if you're a super fan of Rachel Maddow. I mean, that's just clearly true.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I'm pointing at, you know? So which is kind of weird. That's disturbing.
Sure.
That's not how it was in 2003, you know?
No, definitely not. No.
So that puts us in I think it puts us in a position where we have to not in any way think about embracing Republicans but we cannot be stopped by those who would say you sound like Tucker Carlson. You sound like
no, absolutely not.
You know, Glenn Greenwald. Now they'll even say that.
Yeah.
We can't be stopped in our thinking by those kinds of objections. And we also, I think that we have to abandon the strategy of working with Democrats if we're going to be on the absolute left. Like we're not going to, for the most part.
What does that mean, though? Like in practice, what does that mean?
That means that we need to think of, I'm not quite sure in every single, like, I'm okay. Let me just think about it for a second, because this is a good
Sure.
question. It means that obviously I think the long-term aim will have to be developing an independent socialist party. That and long-term, I mean the next 10 years, something like that. And this might be something I'm saying partly out of reaction to the threats that I feel are existential that we're facing. Like, because we can't rely on the slow evolutionary approach to politics happening on a timeline that will stave off some really cataclysmic events, we are forced in a way to try to organize for more radical change through developing an independent party. So there's that. And then other than that, it would mean like we would have to stop even worrying about like which party is the one that we can trust to actually be the peace, to bring forward a peace candidate.
Well, I would certainly agree with the second part of that, right? I mean, I absolutely don't think you can trust either one to do that. I mean, I think,
right.
I mean,
it's like saying, let's forget about these particular contingent questions and think about this in terms of the overall trend. And we can see a lot of mostly continuity between the Democrats and the Republicans, especially in terms of foreign policy. And so for that reason alone, in a time when we're on the cusp of possibly a world war, there's a need for an independent socialist workers movement and party.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a few thoughts about that.
Take it apart, because I'm coming up with it, not like completely right now, but
sure,
I'm articulating it maybe for one of the first times. So
sure. I mean, I don't know how much I want to take it apart a bit. I think that I will also say, right, I mean, I think that sometimes there are, people who who see like, look, I can give you, I mean, whatever we're talking, right? So just in the spirit of like friends talking, I can give you like my own best guess about what's possible or what might happen or whatever. And I'm very happy to have that discussion, right? But I mean, like, I also think, like, kind of zooming out the lens a little bit, right? I mean, I also think there's a sense in which some people who, you know, who don't like me, or, you know, think that they're, you know, sort of think that they're to my left, whatever that means, or whatever. Like
my son.
Yeah,
He likes you fine, but he definitely thinks he's to the left of you. So we can use him as the
yeah. No, I'm really just subtweeting members of the Lain family right now. Yeah, no, but I mean, I think sometimes people with that perspective, I feel like, sort of would miss what I would see as the point of a lot of the stuff that I say, right? In other words, like, they see me kind of arguing for the stuff that I think that I have a good argument for, or that I think that, like, I could make some kind of useful intervention on, and then they kind of extrapolate from that I must be against anything that goes beyond that, right? And that's not really right? I mean,
okay,
words,
yeah.
Like, I think that, you know, it's not like I spend my time thinking about, like, man, how can I encourage people to support, you know, to support
Bernie
like
Sanders in 2024. You're not
Bernie
like
Sanders in 2024, right? Yeah, exactly, right. That's like, how could I get people on the left to support Bernie Sanders in 2024, or, you know, I mean, obviously that's unlikely to happen, but like the sort of broader strategic perspective that might be a stand-in for, right? And I really don't, right? I mean, like, that's not. I mean, maybe there have been times when I have a little bit, but like but I'm not. That really, by and large, has not been my focus, right? I mean, like, how, you know, how could I get people to agree that, like, what I think is, like, the sort of most, you know, easy to imagine path forward for the left is, like, the one that they should be focused on or whatever. I mean, that's not really my interest, right? I mean, I think, as I've seen it, right, since I started doing this stuff in 2018, because of you, right? So I think I want everybody, including members of your family, I hope, are really clear that, like, you're responsible for all this, right? I mean, that like, anything
I met
bad,
you and you're a waitress at a cocktail bar.
Exactly. Anything bad that Ben does is ultimately Doug's fault, right?
I know, that's right. And I feel I'm proud to take on that responsibility, Ben.
But
I have utter confidence in you. Just like I have utter confidence in the other Ben that we've been talking about. But
sure. But like, but since 2018, when I've been doing this stuff, it's like, you know, whatever. Like, I have run my mouth about lots of different subjects that have interested me at lots of different times. But I think overall, right, like, what's the project been, right? The project has been to do two things, right? One, the primary one, is to the kind of stuff that I was mostly doing in the series of videos that I did for Zero Books, you know, and this kind of stuff I was doing for the debunk segment on TNBS, and the kind of stuff that I do that's, like, probably still the bread and butter of Give Them an Argument and all the public debates and all that stuff, which is more or less to, you know, to debunk right-wing ideas, to make arguments for certain kinds of basic socialist ideas, you know, whatever, you know, to do all of that, right? And so the sort of person who all of that is directed to is not somebody who's, like, a different kind of socialist than I am, right? You know, that's the person that all that is directed to is to somebody who's just, like, not on board with any of it, right? You know, who I think can, you know, I hope can be persuaded, right? And then the second thing, which was always part of it, you know, I mean, if you read the first book, I mean, this was there, right? You know, but, like, certainly got much more prominent with the second book, is trying to convince my friends and comrades on the left not to do weird, embarrassing shit that makes the first part harder, right? That's the second part, right? But I mean, that's like
was the part that I was most interested in you doing when I asked you to Give Them an Argument, was creating an example for the left on how to and how to think about engaging in politics generally, and mostly with each other. I mean,
Right.
yeah, with the right, but mostly with each other. That we needed to be able to make arguments and think and steelman each other's arguments and all of that.
Yeah, and the two go together in a pretty obvious way, right? I mean, like
Right.
there's the like the people, like the kind of stuff that I really have in mind with number two is less people who like might have a different best guess than I do about like what's a plausible like sort of path forward in terms of like left electoral strategy than like people who think clapping is problematic and everybody should freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences, and everybody should devote a lot of time to feeling very guilty about their internalized whiteness and things like that, right? So so all of that is just to say, right? I mean, like if I remember years ago when we had a similar conversation, and I asked you a similar question. Like you kind of said something about how you wanted Chris Smalls, who, by the way, you were the only person who I knew back then who knew that name. But you wanted Chris Smalls to refound the First International. It's like, okay, I mean, if that happens,
that was kind of half delusional, right? But he actually ended up doing much better than many people would have predicted.
Totally. First time I ever heard his name was when he was interviewed on your podcast, So, but yeah, they, but like, look, I mean, obviously a half joke here, but it's like, if that happened, yeah, I'm for it, right? I mean, like, if there's a, if there's a, I mean, if we get some sort of like mass wave of, I don't know, like anarcho-syndicalism, or like we get or there's like a
as a Marxist, if we get a mass wave of anarcho-syndicalism or whatever, I have to put that down and have them all shot.
Okay,
but,
okay, fair enough. But look, I mean, or if some of the people that you work with who sometimes frustrate me, like really do get around to forming a revolutionary party, and it's not like 10 people meeting in a back room somewhere, it's like millions of people, then I'll be overjoyed, right? I'll be over the moon, right? They have a but so that's just like what I do kind of want to say all that before we get into this, just because I think that I mean, both because it's like honest, and also just because like I don't, I think that if people kind of don't get where I'm coming from, what my priorities are and aren't, right? Like the discussion can read wrong, but like now if we're getting into like what's my best guess, right, about what what's like realistically going to happen, I mean, yeah, if there was some sort of mass viable independent workers or socialist party, then that would be wonderful, of course. I think there are, like, depending on exactly what you mean by that, right? There are there are like these big structural impediments in America's electoral system to to like new parties emerging, right? Like that's like a very big problem nobody's come up with a great solution to yet. I think that I think that one thing that I do worry about a little bit here is that I think it's very easy for a certain kind of radical to sort of look at failed attempts to do less ambitious things and conclude, oh, well, that's clearly a dead end. So therefore we need to just somehow succeed in doing the wildly more ambitious thing, which is like a little bit.
We couldn't figure out how to make a plane that could fly. So clearly we need to get to the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's kind of a flawed reasoning. Listen, we're at 52 minutes here. I want to say, I don't need you to go, but what I want you to say is, like, at 52 minutes, we're going to shift over to the Patreon part of our conversation, and maybe we can pick this up and talk about this. And we've been kind of doing this all along, but and a little bit more personal or practical,
Mm.
immediate terms, like what are we doing
Mm-hmm.
in our own projects that we think might have some might need to change or might need to stay the same, or like how do I evaluate what I've been doing since since I started at 0 books to now, and how do you evaluate what you've been doing? Because again, like I said at the beginning, I do feel as though I'm at a bit of an impasse and maybe need to rethink what I was doing in order to get to the next stage. So like right here, we'll start with the Patreon part of this.